Rayman, were you surprised to be named Best Video Game of the Year?
No.
Does it bother you that critics call this game addictive?
Nope.
Can you tell us what that O stands for?
Nope.
Are you ready to explode on PC CD-ROM?
Yeah.
Available for the Sony PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and now on PC CD-ROM.
It notice how they wisely exclude the Atari Jaguar. Alright guys, let's begin this little exploration of the Sony PlayStation with the first real hit on the console, and that was the original Rayman. Originally developed by future industry powerhouse Ubisoft for the Atari Jaguar. When it became clear that the Atari Jaguar version wasn't going to turn much of a profit because they decided to start porting the game to as many different consoles as possible, including PC, the Sega Saturn, and of course the Sony PlayStation. And of all the versions to get made, the one that is most fondly remembered is the PlayStation version. Despite so many different versions of this game coming out, in some even being purportedly better than the PlayStation version, such as the Sega Saturn version, Rayman is often remembered as a PlayStation classic and was one of the first games to actually see a re-release under the Greatest Hits line. So, what is the plot of Rayman? Well, it takes place in a dream world that is currently under siege by an evil villain by the name of Mr. Dark. And the only one who apparently can stop him is the limbically challenged Rayman. It's a pretty basic story, and we're still at that stage in the history of the industry where story is just context in a video game. But, you know, Rayman is still pretty memorable just because it has such a unique vibe to it. It's similar in a sense to the Night series in that it just has a very dreamlike atmosphere with the music and all the bizarre and strange imagery that you see. And it's brought to life with some stunning graphics for the time too. It was the age of 3D gaming, and because of that, 2D games like this often tended to get overlooked because of that. But something like Rayman has held up a lot better than the vast majority of games that came out on the original PlayStation, because it's using the technology in a way that it's better suited to. While the PlayStation was definitely better at 3D than other consoles at the time, it could still be beneficial to put some of that processing power into a good old-fashioned 2D side-scroller, and Rayman is definitely a great example of that. The animation is fluid, the levels are creatively designed, and it's got a great soundtrack too. It's still holds up today, even after all these years. As for the gameplay, it's a pretty basic 2D side-scroller. Basically, you're just, doing what you do, jumping around, platform to platform, trying to fend off enemies, get from point A to point B, all that stuff you expect. It does have a really good sense of progression, though, as over the course of the game, Rayman will gain new power-ups and abilities that he will keep over the course of the game, such as being able to throw his fist for a ranged attack, clean the walls, and hover with his hair. So it actually is a really good sense of progression, and it still holds up pretty well too. The controls here are just fantastic. If there is one problem with the original Rayman, I would have to say it's a save system. The game uses a combination of password saves and the memory card, and while you can save your game to the memory card, whatever you saved at the time, like in regards to how many lives or continues you have, that's what you're going to have when you boot up that save file. So if you save when you have no more continues, get ready to see that title screen a lot more often than you would care to. So yeah, that's a bit annoying, so that's something to keep in mind if you're going to play the original Rayman. Its issues aside, Rayman was still a really big hit, especially on the PlayStation, and that would prompt Ubisoft to get to work on another game in the series. However, while they originally intended to do a 2D game for the sequel. That was very quickly scrapped, and it was decided that they would do a 3D game instead. And because they wanted it to be of the highest quality possible, what they decided to do was move the game to the Nintendo 64. And that game ended up being Rayman 2: The Great Escape, which to this day is still considered to be one of the best 3D platformers of all time. Rayman 2 actually did get ported to the PlayStation 1 at some point. However, they had to make some really big concessions in order to get it there. Half of the levels are missing, and the graphics got a major downgrade. Yet, despite that, it's still Rayman 2, as you probably know and love it, and it's still fantastic. A lot of PlayStation, best of PlayStation lists still have Rayman 2 on there, even though this is easily the worst version of the game, outside of a weird version for some oddball console that I'm not aware of. There were a couple of other Rayman games on the PlayStation. Probably the weirdest was Rayman Brain Games, which was a surprisingly difficult edutainment game, which is just one of the weirdest beasts on the entire console. But an even weirder specimen would be Rayman Rush, which, if you can believe it, is actually a demake of Rayman Arena, which was an on-foot racing game for the PlayStation 2 that came out after the PlayStation had basically been abandoned by the general public. Not sure why they decided to do that, but it sure is an interesting tidbit. While we're on the subject of the PlayStation 2, Rayman 3 would eventually see a release on the console. However, it wouldn't have the same impact that Rayman or Rayman 2 would have, and would very quickly be forgotten, especially in light of all the other great platformers that were coming out at the time, like Ratchet & Clank, Jak and Daxter, and Sly Cooper. And it also didn't help that when Rayman did return, he found himself facing an enemy that he simply couldn't defeat, and that was the Raving Rabbids. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people forget that these little bastards got their start in the Rayman series. And the Rabbids were just so popular that they basically took over Rayman's stake in the gaming industry for a couple of years. Eventually, though, Rayman would make a comeback with the incredibly awesome Rayman Origins, which Ubisoft would follow up with the outstanding Rayman Legends, which is easily one of the best 2D side-scrollers of the past decade. It is just so good. But for whatever reason, Ubisoft has not followed up any of these games, and I'm not exactly sure why. What I would have done by now is maybe try to go 3D again, capture some of the magic that Rayman 2 had with this new style that they had for Rayman. But I have a feeling it's going to be a while before Ubisoft decides to give that a shot. And they probably have a hard time selling it because Ubisoft has this weird thing going where they're trying to convince gamers that we don't actually own the games we buy. So, they need to get over that little phase before they need to try and bring Rayman back. But I would like to see it, so please make it happen at some point, Ubisoft. Anyway, that's going to do it for Rayman, guys. Be sure to tune in tomorrow as we take a look at the next game in the retrospective.